All right, good afternoon and assalamu alaikum for those of us who are joining today. My name is Miriam Zaidi and I'm the Director of Services for Sakeenah. We are having this session for a number of reasons. One, because it's really important, it's a really important topic, and we should all have the tools to be able to have these kind of conversations. And two, we should acknowledge the unfortunate death of this little girl who passed away at the young age of 9 years old. And you know, when we're talking about death and grieving and dying, we are talking about something that is very difficult, even for adults to have conversations around, let alone have those conversations with their children. So today's agenda, what I'm going to be focusing on is how to actually have those conversations. What are some of the words that we need to be using while we're having these conversations? And if you do have any questions or if you have anything that pops up about what I'm talking about, please feel free to pop it into the chat or raise your hand, and we will try our very best to make sure we get through all of the questions. Like I mentioned, this session is being recorded, so if you would like to keep your camera off, please keep your camera off. And the recording we will have and we will try to post out onto our socials as well, inshallah. So my name is Miriam, and I am the Director of Services for Sakeenah. So before I get into our topic, I just want to go into a brief overview of what Sakeenah is. So Sakeenah is it's an organization that works on reducing cultural and religiously sensitive gaps to individuals that are requesting services. We started off with having transitional homes across Ontario, and we've expanded significantly to 7 homes across Canada. In addition to that, we also provide services to like a wider range of people in terms of casework. What that means is that we provide access to caseworkers throughout Canada, whether you're in BC, Nunavut, or any of the areas that we don't have homes. You can access a caseworker and work alongside them to meet our goals. We also have mental health counseling. So if any of you are looking to speak to somebody or are looking to just, have a conversation with somebody who identifies with you, who has the same religious background as you, or even culturally understands what you may be going through, please feel free to reach out. There are 2 other programs that I don't want to go into too much detail about, but one of them is our food market program that we have started in the Mississauga area, and we uh, provide we provide food to clients who have signed up with our People's Market. And we provide that once a month for any client that's signed up free of charge. And then our foster care program, which is the newest program in our arsenal, which allows us to provide foster care to foster families and to foster children all across America. We're currently licensed only in Ontario, but we are the first Muslim foster care agency in North America. I am going to be clicking my screen. I hope I apologize because I am, as people come in and people join us, I'm going to have to allow them to come in, inshallah. So let's get started a little bit on how to talk about grief and how to talk about death. And in particular, how to talk about it to a child. So as adults, there are 2 things to consider. One is that as adults, we understand the concept of death as something that is finite, something that cannot be reversed. How did we learn these concepts? How did we learn that death was something that cannot be reversed, something that is completely final? We learned these concepts through things that we saw on television, things that we cognitively are are aware of, things that people have told us. But as a child, these concepts don't necessarily exist. And there are 2 things that we need to consider. One is how we utilize our own conversations about the word death when we're talking about it to our children, and 2, how we relay that in an emotional capacity. And I know that sounds a little bit confusing. In emotional capacity, you're probably wondering what I mean by that. And what I mean by that is a lot of us have a lot of trouble actually talking about our emotions. And this is something that is very common across the board, whether we're talking about death, whether we're talking about grieving, whether we're talking about any physical emotion that exists, we have a lot of trouble describing our emotion. So if we as adults have trouble describing our emotions, how then can we convey our emotions to children? And so the first thing we have to do is actually understand what our emotional capabilities and capacities are. So when we are actually talking about grieving, what are we actually seeing in our physical bodies as well as in our emotional body or our emotional state? When I personally am talking about grieving, I am talking about a heaviness in my chest. I experience it in my chest. Some of you may experience it in your stomachs. Some of you may experience it in your throats. And some of you may experience it in your eyes. I personally experience it in my chest. So when we're talking about grief, we need to understand where we're experiencing it in our physical body. So I want you guys to take a minute and I want you to close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose and release from your mouth. And I I want you to think about the word grief. And I want you to think about the word sadness. And I want you to look at where that sensation is sitting in your physical body. I want you to understand where emotions rest inside your physical body. And as you do that, I want you to also recognize that there may be some thoughts or words or phrases that are coming in. Like, this is hard. I don't like this. It's easier to push things down. I don't want to talk about this. And this is perfectly natural for us who don't know how to express those emotions. And it's perfectly natural for us to not want to feel uncomfortable in the moment of grief. So if I turn the page around and I say, take a deep breath and think of a moment that makes you happy. Where does that sit with you? If I'm thinking about happiness, I'm feeling it in my face, in my cheeks. I don't feel it anywhere else in my physical body. Maybe sometimes in my stomach, depending on what it is. But our emotions are their physical reactions as well in our body. Now, how do we explain that to a child? How do we explain or how do we talk about our physical emotions to a child? It's really easy to say sadness or happiness or anger, but understanding what they're experiencing because of their behavior will help them as well as you identify what emotion they're experiencing. The most common one is that weird pit in the stomach. You know, the when children complain about a stomach ache, that might be anxiety, that might be grief, they may be feeling uncomfortable about something. And when we understand where physical emotion rests in our body, we can understand how to have conversations about uncomfortable things with our children. So that's the first thing, understanding the emotion. And then the second thing is the words that we use. There are common phrases that a lot of cultures use when we're talking about death. And those common phrases include passed away, gone to God, she's just resting now, she's gone away to a farmland. There are a lot of common phrases that are used across various cultures. And there is a problem when we utilize phrases. And this is a problem not just with children, but also with adults. And I'm going to get into this a little bit further because I think this is really important. The first problem is that as a society, we are uncomfortable with using the word death, or we're uncomfortable with using the word dying. And we need to make ourselves comfortable using factual words about what is actually happening. So if a person has died, use the words a person has died. And a lot of you may be thinking or saying that might be insensitive. it's easier to say they've passed on. It's easier to have like phrases where we're explaining what happens. But those phrases may be easier in the moment, but they actually can create a lot of confusion and negative emotion. And they create this sense of fear because they don't know, children don't know, and even adults don't know sometimes what's actually happening. And I'm talking about like your older children, not just your younger children. I'm talking about like your teenagers or your children in your 20s, not just the children who are like, under the age of 13. We need to be able to create an environment that's safe and nurturing to have these kind of conversations. And so it is very, very important to use the right terminology. And it's also okay not to have the answer to everything because it's really difficult to explain the why. It's really difficult to explain why somebody has died. And I'm going to get into a few key phrases that we should be using. So the first one is to have and use the word death. And how do we describe death? How do we describe when somebody has died and they are no longer alive? The simplest way to explain it is to talk about what cannot happen with that person. We are talking about death as something that's final. So, what we're saying is when a person is sleeping, for example, we can see their chest move up and down. If we put our face close to their nose, we can hear their breathing, we can feel their breathing, we can see their breathing. But when somebody has died, their chest doesn't move and they don't no longer breathe. When somebody has died, they can't get up and walk around, whereas somebody who has been sleeping can get up and walk. So we need to use like words that explain the physical act of death. When we have explained the physical act of death, and this is even difficult to explain it to adults who may not understand, or as you are explaining to people who are older than young children, and you're explaining the grieving process or the whys, this is also very difficult to explain. So we need to be comfortable with having these kind of conversations where we're using these words. The second thing is to understand that not every single person, including children, is going to grieve the same way. What that means is that there are going to be people who you can physically see grief on their bodies, and you can see it when they're talking about this person, and you can see it when they're attending the funerals, and then you will see other people who don't understand or cannot express that emotion. And each person will grieve in their own way. Each person has the right to grieve in their own way. And we need to be comfortable with how another person grieves. So when we're talking a little bit about, what that process looks like, we may have a child, for example, who just goes quiet, who doesn't want to use the words about how they feel or how this conversation makes them feel, but they may ask questions like, "Oh, where's grandma? I don't see grandma." Like Eid's coming up. For those of you who celebrate Eid, if somebody recently has passed away, a child may ask that question. And it's the same thing on other special occasions. And it's very, very important to recognize that a person or a young person is going to grieve differently, and they're going to remember the person who has died differently. So we need to make sure that we're creating that safe environment, and we need to make sure that we're using the right words, and we need to make sure that everybody grieves differently and we understand where our emotions are resting in the body. Why is death such a difficult concept to talk about? It's because it's something that it's how do I put this? It's almost I'm not going to use the word magical, but it's almost fantastical. It's not something that we have the words to understand or comprehend. We can understand what it means when we lose somebody or somebody has died, but the comprehension piece is very challenging. And what I mean by that is let's talk about death from a developmental stage. So if you have a young person from the age of, say, like they're infants or toddlers, so they're under 3 years old, they're going to not understand what death is. Even if you use the right words, even if you try to talk about the emotions, they are not going to understand this concept of death because they don't understand a lot of concepts. But what they will see and what they will recognize is the change in routine that death causes. So, for example, if there is a family member that lived with you and that person has died, and you have a young toddler under the age of 3, and that young toddler always ate breakfast with this family member, this young toddler will recognize that that family member is no longer there. The change in routine is what's going to impact or help them understand their concept of death. Something is different. Something doesn't feel right. Something is wrong. And then comes the response of grief. There may be some irritability. There may be some emotions. There may be some excessive crying. There may be regression or changes in their sleeping pattern. So you can physically see when something is happening to your young toddler. How do we intervene? How do we help that young person? How do we help somebody under the age of 3? Well, what they need is they need to reestablish routines. That means we need to get back into a routine that makes sense to them, that even though it's a little uncomfortable, works for this young person, this toddler, and is able to establish safety and security for this person. And comfort, touch is also equally important. So as a child is irritable or uncomfortable, it's okay to like rub their shoulders, and it's okay to rub their bellies. And you can't see my bellies, but it's okay to establish a little bit of comfort through touch, and it's okay to hold your child, and it's okay to relay the emotions that are happening, like, I understand you're upset, come let me hold you. Now is a preschooler, so these are aged 3 to 5, and these are children that actually understand a little bit more. But their understanding is that death is actually magical. It's fantastical. It's something that can be reversed or is temporary. And this is because of the words that we use and their concept of death. So if we say they've passed on, or they've gone, oh, grandma has gone to see uncle, or uncle has gone to see grandma, or, however you want to phrase it, the way that our preschoolers, our young people are thinking about this concept is that they've just gone away for a visit. They'll come back. This is something that's reversible. This is temporary. It's something that's not permanent. So they may not understand this concept of grief. And we need to be comfortable with explaining it over and over and over again. You know this age, the 3 to 5 age, they're the question askers. They're why. They always ask why or how come, or um, all of those questions that are the same questions over and over again. And that's actually how they explain or how they respond in their grief as well. When we're looking at these children who are the age of 3 to 5, they're going to ask about death. They're going to ask about, what does it mean to die? What does it mean that grandma's dead? What does it mean that uncle's dead? What does it mean that our pet has died? What does that look like? What does death mean? What happens after you die? They're going to use these words, and they're going to constantly ask questions. We need to be aware of the fact that they're going to ask these questions, and we need to be prepared with an answer of what we're going to say. And it's very simple to just focus on what the facts are. They may do something also a little uncomfortable, which is they may reenact death through play. And this is because, excuse me, every young person, every child, every preschooler, because they don't understand death, they understand it as something magical or fantastical. So they don't know how what they're doing is impacting you emotionally. They don't understand that concept. So when you have a young person who is play acting death, it's important to explain to them, don't get angry, don't get upset, because they're going to develop fear of death at that point. Explain to them that this is making me sad because it's reminding me that your grandmother died. It's reminding me of my hurt. Do you remember yesterday when you hurt yourself and how, you know, I came over and I tucked you in and I made sure your boo was okay. But you remember the pain. This is what it's reminding me. And I know we just received a question on our chat. Um, it is this person wrote about how somebody, their mother passed away and it was really difficult, and what they were told was that the mother had gone to sleep, and this has stuck with them for many years, and it is really difficult. And what we don't understand, and I'm getting emotional thinking about this, because we try our hardest as parents, as adults, as important figures, to comfort our children in a way that makes sense to us. But what we don't recognize is that comfort may not be the best way, because it impacts them throughout their life in terms of how they relate to the person that has died, as well as how they relate to their emotions, as well as how they relate to death as a concept. I'm going to go to the school age children next. And the person who messaged me, I am really sorry for your loss. And I can't imagine how hard it is to lose somebody that close to you and have to experience death in that way. In school age children, we're looking at the ages between 6 and 9. And this is the age where children are very creative, and they're engaged in play, and they're engaged in concepts associated with myth, magic. They're engaged in like make believe is probably the best way for me to actually say this. And when we associate death with play or creativity in that regard, imagine creatures like the boogeyman or a ghost or jinn or or I don't know if any of you guys have seen Harry Potter, but like, those creatures in the masks, the bogarts. Like, there are a lot of concepts in the things that we watch and the things that we engage in. And this is how children between the ages of 6 and 9 actually engage in the concept of death. And their emotional response is actually a little bit different than somebody who's younger. They may actually respond aggressively. They may respond in a way that makes you wonder, what is wrong with my child? Why are they aggressive? Why are they having nightmares? Why are they very emotional or behaviorally um you know engaging in activity that is very rough, especially boys. Girls do this too, to a different degree, but girls will be vicious in different ways. Boys are more play fighting, they're more aggressive. But why are they doing this? And then the signs of having that distress is like they may have nightmares that are coming up. They may also engage in those violent plays that we just talked about. But more importantly, they may take on a role of the person that that just died. And what I mean by that is, if it's like, like a grandmother or a parental figure or somebody who's an adult, and they are uh, trying to have this understanding of what death is, they are going to do certain actions that may remind them of that person, and may do certain actions or certain play that remind them of the person that has died. And when we're talking a little bit about how do we help this person between the age of 6 and 9? We need to create better memories. We need to create better, like we need to engage them in events. If we need to, we need to um, engage them in the process of memory making activities. There was one I did with a client who had lost a baby. This was a baby that was under 12 months old. SubhanAllah. And one thing that we did was we actually created a baby book. So something that a lot of uh, parents tend to do is they will have like a book full of like first walk, first crawl, first toy, first um, what have you. And this mother didn't get an opportunity to do a lot of these things. And so, because it was something that she was grieving, we were able to create this book. And she did it engaged with her other child who was also school aged and was able to create it together with her child. And they also decided to utilize these memories and create a moment of remembering this young baby that passed away. Sorry, that died. Then we go into the ages of 9 to 12, which is the pre-adolescent ages. So we know right now this is the age where these children are understanding that death is something that's final. They are understanding that it will happen to everybody. But the key part here is a lot of these children between the ages of 9 to 12 are going to look at it like a punishment. They're going to think, what did I do that was so wrong that my grandmother died? What did I do that was so bad? Or I'm so sorry that I misbehaved in school and I promise I will never do it again if only you can bring this person back. SubhanAllah, like they don't, a lot of these children, they're starting to understand that death is final and they're starting to have an understanding that even themselves, they can die. And they're starting to develop a fear. They're starting to have anxiety around it, and they're starting to withdraw, and they're starting to have very, very, very negative thoughts. So, what we need to do is we need to explain how death, yes, is something that is final, but we also need to explain how we are remembering this other person. And we also need to explain how we are offering a place or a space that's safe and secure for this pre-adolescent to be able to let out this emotion that they're feeling, because there's a lot of anxiety, it's a lot of fear. And what is fear and what is anxiety? It is the unknown, the fear of the unknown. So we don't know what happened. So when we use the words that are basically factual, and we use words that are that create an understanding of what death is, it reduces that anxiety, it reduces that fear, and it reduces this aggressive behavior or this withdrawing into the emotion. And the final group that I want to talk about is adolescence, which is anywhere from 12 and up. And young people understand death very, very cognitively, and they understand death, but they're searching for a meaning. They're searching for an understanding. They're searching for almost like an identifying factor of death and what that means to them. And this is when religion actually comes into play, because this is when they'll start asking questions around spirituality. And as Muslims, we believe that our physical body and our spiritual soul are two separate things. So after we die, our physical body dies, but our spiritual soul is still alive, waiting for a particular day. How do we explain that to our children? How do we explain that there's a difference? And this is where that spirituality piece comes in, because what we're talking about when it comes to death is that physical body. It is the final, the finality of the physical body. Death means the physical body is not functional anymore. It cannot house that soul, or that ruh in Arabic. And even if you don't use that word of of soul, or you don't add that spiritual component in, it is that finality of the body that you have to focus on. And in Islam, as Muslims, we will explain that soul piece, but we need to explain it in a way that that soul cannot come back. It can only move forward, and only when God calls it. So it is still about the finality of the physical body. And, this young person, this adolescent, anywhere from 12 and up may, be very aggravated, and they may cry out that life is not fair. Why does this person have to die? They may have an existential crisis where they're wondering about their own life. Why am I alive if this person has died? Or why did my grandmother have to die and leave me? And they may have like guilt. They may have anger. They may have their behavior may regress in school with their friends. And their guilt is really important to also talk about, because when we're talking about guilt, they may be they may be feeling guilty that they didn't spend enough time with grandma or uncle or whoever has died. And they may be feeling and experiencing shame at the last thing that they ever said to this person. Or, grandma had said, "Oh, come over and we'll do something together." And that young person would rather spend time with their friends. There may be a lot of guilt and shame that is associated with this person dying. And we need to be aware of these. We need to be able to explore how to talk about this shame and this guilt. And this is where, talking about it from like with a therapist helps, as well as like your own personal experiences. And it's very, very important for us to also like explain that, what you're experiencing is very, very normal. What you're experiencing is it's very normal to feel ashamed of the last thing that you said. But your grandmother knew that you loved her, because, and this is very important, don't leave it as just a concept. Show it. Because every single Sunday she brought cookies. And every single time she called me, she called to ask about you. And every single Eid, she gave you a present. Every single one, whether you were here or you were visiting somebody else, every single time she had something for you. And these are all foundations of how your grandmother, showed love. And it's harder when you have a younger person that has died. So if you have a young child that may have died, or you have a young like sibling that may have died, it's harder to express like physical acts of love and show how that person may have loved you. But think about it this way: love language it's very different and unique for each person. And so when we're talking about love language for maybe a younger person, a child who has died, think about how they would always curl next to you, and how they would be physically close, how that young person would touch you, and how that would be an expression of love. And when we're talking about these concepts, excuse me, we have to also understand that love is shown in different ways, and these emotions are felt in different ways. And it just takes that one connection, just that one connection, for that person to identify more with those feelings of positivity and love than they do with that guilt and that shame. I know we talked a lot about children, and I know we talked a little bit about how to talk about children, how to talk about death with children. I'm sorry. One we need to also do and be aware of is how we as adults also have this conversation. Do we hush when this child comes into the room because we're talking about our grief and our loss of this person that has died? Do we hide our tears or our own emotions when we're talking about how this person has died? Probably, because in general we tend to hide our emotions. And 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 when we're hiding our emotions, what we're doing is we're actually creating an environment of fear where it is not okay to talk about emotions. It's not okay to show emotions. It's not okay to express emotions. So when we are sad, when we are grieving, when we were having these very, very difficult emotions, by the way, I know it's hard to share them and like express them because we were never taught how to as adults. When we were children, we were never, ever, ever taught how to share our emotions. So what I'm teaching you right now is a concept that's very challenging. But when we are experiencing these emotions, don't hide them from your children. It doesn't make you look weak if you cry, and it doesn't make you look weak if you're sad and you're remembering somebody who has died. It doesn't make you look like a bad person in any capacity for having very, very human emotions. As a Muslim, one thing that I know is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would never have given us the ability to have these emotions if it wasn't for us to be able to express. Even anger to a degree, we are given this emotion to be able to express in a healthy way, in a halal way, in a way that does not harm other people. There are ways of expressing it. But each of our emotions comes from a real place, a real place. And it resides not just in our physical body, but also in our emotional body. So we need to recognize that. So when your child comes and they find you crying and they find you being sad and they come up to you and they say, "What's wrong, mom? Why are you crying?" You shouldn't say, "Nothing, it's nothing, go away." You should say, "I am crying because I miss your grandmother and I'm feeling very sad." And then your child may actually have questions and words that they want to use in that moment. And they want to express how they are feeling in that moment and how they are remembering the person that has died in that moment as well. So we want to model the right behavior for our children after we learn it for ourselves. SubhanAllah, I know I've been talking for about 40 minutes, but this one sister has shared a message about how when she was experiencing the different stages of grief, it wasn't explained properly. And I'm sure, and I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth, but I'm sure that when these stages aren't explained properly and the experiences aren't shared properly, what we're missing how to deal with the fear, and we're missing how to deal with the fear of dealing with these emotions. So I I I appreciate the sister who has shared her experiences with me, and I encourage anybody who has any questions or thoughts or comments about death and dying in any capacity to please send a message and we will address them. But I also encourage anybody to have conversations with a therapist or an imam or somebody who is a community leader that can have these conversations. Sakeenah actually offers mental health counseling as well from a religious and culturally appropriate lens. And what we do is we match our clients with therapists who may speak the same language, who may identify the same, and we are able to have these conversations a little bit more deeply, especially when it's difficult to explore your own emotions on your own. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to bring up? Oh, one question that just came up is how do you answer the question if you don't know? One, it's important to recognize that it's okay to not have the answers. It's okay to understand that people die for different reasons, which is they may be old, there may have been an accident, there may have been something medical that may have happened. And it's okay to not know the answer to the why. Because remember, we talked a little bit about this, that fantastical piece. We need to focus on the physical acts of what is fact and what is not fact. And it's also okay to say, if I don't know, I will try to find out for you. If I don't know, let me find out and let me get back to you. It's okay not to have all of the answers. And in doing so, you're establishing this level of communication with your young person, or even your adult. And you're establishing a level of communication that allows them to know that you are going to be honest and truthful to them. One thing we need to recognize is that when we are giving information to anybody, and you'll know that notice that when I did how I did this as well, when I broke it down depending on the different age groups, you need to give it in small doses. You need to be able to allow people, individuals, young people, to absorb the information that they are receiving from you. So don't say a full paragraph of this person died because this. Start with something small and in small doses. And as they ask more questions or you notice those behaviors and um, there is a regression in behavior, that's when you address those moments. I've noticed that you are angry or you're feeling sad. Can you tell me a bit about why you are feeling angry or you're feeling sad? I noticed that you've started being a little bit more angry after grandma has died. Can you tell me a little bit about why you're angry? So it's okay to have these questions and focus on things that you notice. And it's also okay for the child to be like, don't want to talk about it. I don't have the words for you right now. But recognize the emotions that the child may be going through. So another question that just came up is um, a young person, a young child, a toddler has said that, Mom, please don't die and go to Jannah because I'll miss you. And they have developed a fear. This young person has developed a fear of losing their mother. And it's because they have recently experienced a death in the family where two young people have lost their mother. There are, this is a really great example. Also, I really do apologize for the death in your family, but this is a really great example of why it's important to use the right words when we're talking to our young people. It is really important to use words like this person has died, not that this person has gone to Jannah. Because when we use words like, and for those of you who don't know, Jannah is heaven. When we use words like this person has gone to heaven or have gone to Jannah, what we are basically saying to our young person is that this person will come back, and this person is like gone to, like, this person has left and will come back. This person has is waiting for you. But then when you say things like, they can't come back, they're not able to contact you from Jannah, there's no phones in Jannah, you're creating this sense of fear. You're creating this uncertainty about what death means. You're creating this uncertainty of what death looks like. So I encourage you all to have conversations with your young people. And what I'm going to do is, as we post this video, inshallah, I'm going to actually put out just an info sheet as well. And I'm going to ask our team to send this to all of our participants about how to actually talk to your child based on that age group that I went over, because I think it's really important for us to have, and that'll help you have these kind of conversations. So I encourage you all to use the right words. Don't say that this person has gone to Jannah. Say this person has died. What that means is that their physical body can no longer work. And we are going to miss them. And we are going to be sad. But we will take care of each other. We all die. But we die when we die. It's a very vague way of putting it, but when we die, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that we should die. Maybe don't add that last line because that's a little confusing. So another question that has come up is when a young daughter asks about her belongings after she dies. This is very interesting because the understanding is when the understanding that children may have is that they're able to take some of their stuff with them, and they're able to take some of their belongings with them. And I know it's harder if you've never experienced a death, but when we're talking about death, what we're talking about is one, when we need to talk about the concept of the final, which is the physical body. And when we're talking about the belongings of the person that has died, what do you think we should do with the belongings? If I die or you die, what should happen to your favorite stuffed animal? Or what should happen to your clothes? What would you like me to do with them? They may respond that they would like to keep them. And this is where that education piece, that small little education piece comes in, where we say, but we can't take it with us. It'll get ruined if a body is buried. So what would you like me to do with it? And have these conversations in an engaging way that will allow them to actually maybe even have an understanding of the difference between having belongings and having their physical body die. Another question that just popped up is, as we navigate death, my children have asked about the afterlife. One of my children keeps saying they want to die as a child, so they are not accountable. How do I respond to this? This is where that religious piece comes into play when we're talking about that religious component of what happens after a person has died. And, ideally, when we're having these conversations about accountability, and we're talking about religion, what we really want to focus on is talking about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful, and he is all forgiving. He is Ar-Rahman. He is Al-Karim. He is the one that will forgive those of sincerity. So, and then give an example of what happens in real life when you make a mistake or your child makes a mistake and they ask sincerely for apology. They may cry and they say, I'm so sorry, mommy, I didn't mean to hurt you. Or I am so sorry I took this and I broke it. When we're talking about that sincerity, that's how we need to connect accountability back to our children. We need to talk about it in a way that is sincere in their relationship with Allah or with God, back to that spirituality. And so what we need to do is We need to show examples of what has currently happened in the real life when somebody has made a mistake. And so when somebody has made a mistake and they are being held accountable for that mistake, how do you hold them accountable? How do you say it's okay that you broke this? Try to be careful next time. I know it was an accident, but that's you holding them accountable, and that's not them feeling guilty or bad or fearful of the mistake that they've made. So relate it back to how they do things right now. And then explain to them that Allah is forgiving. He's even more forgiving than me, and I'm your mom, and I love you. You just have to ask sincerely and recognize that you made a mistake. We have a few minutes left. Are there any other questions that may pop up? Or does anybody have any questions that they have? You can also directly message me if you don't want everybody to see your questions. I'm just going to see if there's any questions that popped up on my end. There was one that did come up. And this is about the funeral or the janaza. How do we explain or talk about the funeral or the janaza? And once again, it is very important to talk about the facts of what a funeral or janaza may look like. If you do not want your young person to see the person that has died, it is okay, but don't make them scared of that either. Don't be like, no, 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 you can't see this, you cannot see this, it's not good for you. That's going to create anxiety or fear. You need to explain to them that I want you to understand that there may be a moment that I may go and see your grandmother who has died, and I may be very, very sad. I don't want you to see her because I want you to remember her in the last moment that you had with her. And I don't want you to see her like this. And that child may ask, what does she look like? Why is she different? What's happening? Why can't I see her? And explain that your grandmother has died and we are going to be burying her physical body. And her physical body is no longer holding who your grandmother was. If they are at an age, and this is up to you as parents to decide what an appropriate age is, but if they are at an age where they understand the concept of the finality of death, it is also okay to show them what the person who has died looks like, but brace them for what they may see. Explain to them that the that your grandmother, and I'm using grandmother as an example here, of course, but your grandmother who has died is not going to look the same as she did before when she was alive and you knew her, because her physical body is not functional. She cannot move, she cannot breathe, and that means that she has died. So I want you to understand that who you're about to see may kind of sort of look like your grandmother, but your grandmother has died. Explain it to them in a way that they may understand. I appreciate all of the comments that you have left in the chat. This is a very challenging topic, and it's a very, very difficult. And I applaud, I commend, I am here beside anybody who is having these kind of conversations. And if you ever do need to reach out to us because you are uncertain about how to have these conversations, or you're uncertain about a reaction that your child may be having from this conversation, please feel free to do so. As I said, I will send out a fact sheet for everybody who has signed up, and we will post it as well as with the video. But please feel free to also reach out. Our website is www.sakeenahcanada.com. You can reach out to me directly in my email, which I will post as well. And I will actually write my email here, or you can reach out to the general email, and that email will get directed to me as well. But yes, I am available for any questions, any thoughts that somebody may have about what has happened or is happening, and how to talk to your children about death or dying. Ameen, McKenna, I do appreciate the duas and the really kind words. Jazakallah khair. Thank you guys so much. And I will speak to anybody and everybody shortly, inshallah. I hope you guys have a really great, fantastic rest of your Wednesday, and a great Ramadan, inshallah, as well. Assalamu alaikum.